finding those spaces where we can recalibrate are rare, and like they should be the norm. Like chill out rooms in clubs make a lot of sense to me. I want a chill out room in an office.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of Sounds Like Change. And today I'm really excited because the interview is with Sean Adams, who is the founder of Drowned in Sound. He's also a music strategist, he's a journalist, an artist manager, and he founded Drowned in Sound back in the year 2000, where obviously so much has changed since then. So since launching Drowned in Sound, he has helped shape the landscape of online music culture through work like publishing, podcasts, community building, championing artists that include Kaiser Chiefs, Bat for Lashes, Max Richter. Alongside this, Sean has written for the Sunday Times, and he's worked as a producer for BBC Radio 6 Music, and he has spoken and speaks regularly internationally on the future of music, tech, and culture. His work explores the intersection of music, politics, ethics, and community, with a focus on building a fairer and more sustainable creative industry. I really hope you enjoy this episode. So, Sean, I'd love to know what made you choose this song, Fordlandia by Jóhann Jóhannsson.
I found it really difficult to pick a hopeful piece of music because a lot of the music that feels hopeful to me, I realized lyrically wasn't that hopeful, or the story behind the piece of music was not as hopeful. Like my gut went to like a Solange track, and then I was like, actually, this is about a breakup. It's not that. I went through some Feist songs, and I was like, no, none of these quite feel right. And like, I think maybe the records I associate with like hopeful periods of my life are probably a bit different to records that actually have this kind of hope in their heart. And I think actually sometimes the ones that I would jump towards were people that felt resilient and like they'd stepped away from something and felt empowered. And I think when you were talking about thinking about the future, I think I was thinking about how letting go of the current world. And I think subconsciously my brain had done this like, okay. And for some reason I jumped to like Elliott Smith's Everything Means Nothing to Me, which has a line about the future in it, which was maybe just like a way in which my brain went there. But actually, like that song, apparently he cut himself and bled on the piano after having an argument with someone. And I didn't know this until I looked it up for this interview. There was a song by Nine Inch Nails called La Mer, which is an utterly beautiful piano piece with a reading in French chorale. Is that how you pronounce it? I just realized I've never said that word out loud. Caroli? Karat? Like, what is that?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
And that piece apparently was the only song he wrote when he went to a house on the ocean side and was contemplating suicide, which was like, whoa, I did not know that about this piece of work. But apparently he went back to the same house for his wedding. So he's obviously tried to reclaim that space. But I went with this song, one, because it's an utterly, utterly beautiful piece of music. And I think somewhere in my head, I was like, what piece of music would Ariana like as well? And also, I think that it was one of the, when I really think about a piece of music that made me completely and utterly stop in my tracks, it's one of the few pieces that comes to mind every single time. I was much more into noisy punk records and kind of emotionally melancholic kind of songwriters like Jeff Buckley, and was probably at the time starting to get into like minimal techno, and like was always curious about classical music because I didn't understand why people loved it so much. And this piece of music just completely swept me into its arms, and it has these like warm plumes of like the way in which, I mean, there was a video game I played as a kid, and you had to fly over the like warm patches to like make yourself float. And I always think about that when you get turbulence and stuff in the sky, and how you're in these like hot pockets of air, and they're like shifting air pressure. So that piece of music has just got these like riding like puffs of like geyser smoke or something, which I probably think about because I think he was living in Iceland at the time. And it's the opening to the record. It takes about a minute before you start to hear anything. It's about 13 minutes long. And my hope for the future is that everyone has the ability to luxuriate in music, and that you wouldn't be worried about getting people to click in for the first 3 seconds and expecting to hold someone's attention for that long. And I think that growing up working class and overworking since I was about 18, I mean, I had 3 jobs just so I could afford to move to London. I think that idea of being able to take 13 minutes to listen to a piece of music, that feels like such a luxury that maybe only the super rich really have that time to dedicate their attention to deep listening. And everyone should be able to have that. So my hopeful future would be a time where everyone has the ability to kind of log off, unfurl, and get lost in a piece of music like this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's partly time, but then it's partly having that mental space and clarity to sit and like listen. I mean, you know, it's like how albums at the moment, people aren't listening to full albums the way they used to. They're just listening to, you know, a collection of the catchiest songs or the best songs on TikTok, or, you know,
it's interesting because I don't know whether that's always been the case. Like now albums were really popular. The radio is really popular. And I think there's a certain type of person that still listens to albums. And that type of person has always existed, in the same way the people that read the book rather than watch the film adaptation. And I think that whilst it's easier to generalize because the people that set the norms are no longer the gatekeepers of culture, there's actually probably the same amount of people listening to albums all the way through. I didn't mean to, like, it's something I've thought about a lot because almost all the people I know that are music heads, like, listen to albums start to finish. I mean, look at all the Taylor Swift discourse. People are listening to the record start to finish.
Yeah.
When people were talking about people not reading, and you're like, hang on a minute, there's a whole generation that have read all the Harry Potter books. Yeah. And it's like, and they've read all the Twilight books, and like, those aren't short books. And it's like the idea that like young people don't read, or young people don't have attention span, and then they're watching like a 22-part 7-season Netflix series that takes weeks and weeks to watch. It's anyway, I wasn't meaning to contradict you, but I think there's something in that sense of there are people that make the time.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because right now there is this, I guess, notion that people don't have attention span for more than a 7-second clip on TikTok, or, you know, they're not, you know, people are apparently not reading as much, but at the same time, Kindle hasn't actually kicked off in the way that we thought it would. We thought that we wouldn't have any print books in the next 5 to 10 years, but actually, you know, there's, you know, almost like a resurgence of everyone wanting their print books. So there's definitely something interesting going on.
I love the fact that erotica took off when the Kindle took off because people felt like they could read it in public.
That's very true, actually. And it maybe in that case, it makes sense. But no, the song that you sent, because I hadn't heard it before, it was actually a gift. And I love being able to immerse into a sound and just letting it almost affect me on a somatic and embodied level. So I spent that 13 minutes on my yoga mat doing a bit of stretching, you know, stretching my kind of arms and chest out, which I don't do enough when I'm sitting at my desk. And yeah, just feeling the harmonies of it and feeling, I love that kind of metaphor or that analogy you brought up about the turbulence and the air pressure, and it Actually, it reminded me of spring. I don't know if he wrote it with the idea of spring in mind, but it felt like something was blooming in the track.
The interesting thing is actually it's the title track of the album, and the record's actually about Henry Ford's failed attempts to open up in the Amazon. And it's I quite like that there's also this like other layer of meaning to this like instrumental piece. I mean, it very likely could have had spring in mind, but I think there's something quite magical about the fact that actually the whole piece is like this kind of critical look at the end of the machine age and the manufacturing elements, because he's also written a whole record about an IBM manual. Which that was the inspiration, like the data points that he was referring to. And he was an amazing composer. He also did most of the music to Arrival, which Max Richter's On the Nature of Daylight features on. And then sadly passed away around that time. Just as probably his career was like entering into this very mainstream world. So yeah, but yeah, such beautiful piece of music.
Oh, it was absolutely stunning, and I'm going to be listening to that. I'm going to be going back to that for sure, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that feeling of, rather than spring, almost trees sort of sprouting out of the old decaying machines that we've left behind. So I'd love to know, you've been in music your whole life and there's so much incredible work you've done. When did music first wake you up to something bigger than yourself, or to the world that you were directly involved in?
Well, my first memories of music are listening to an interesting combination. So side 2 of Low by David Bowie, my mum said I was obsessed with when I was about 4 or 5. And it's just like beautiful instrumental music, which is odd because it took me probably another 20 years to reconnect with instrumental music like this piece. We also listened to loads of Bob Marley, and that was like interesting to think of, like being on car journeys, and then my dad would maybe then make like weird racist comments, but he absolutely loved Bob Marley. And also, I don't think my dad ever made racist comments with maliciousness. I think it was just like misunderstandings and like the way terminology he would use about people that just was very dated. And like, I think that there's definitely music which he was obsessed with Motown as well. Or is obsessed with Motown. And I definitely felt something in those records, but didn't fully understand people talking about the civil rights movement and social justice. But there was definitely a time when I was getting into, I was like 14, 15, and like one half of my music listening was like skate punk. So like bands like Pennywise criticizing capitalist systems, Rage Against the Machine. And those records kind of had an anger and a rage to them, but they didn't really have a focus. And I remember listening to The Roots, Things Fall Apart, and Common's, is it Water Like Chocolate? It's named after the book, isn't it? Like really socially conscious hip hop. Lots of Mos Def. And I mean, I was growing up in a seaside town in Dorset. Like I wasn't growing up in some multicultural kind of place where I understood a lot of what was being said within the music. But I remember being really caught up in wanting to know more. Like the first book I became properly obsessed with was Anne Frank's diary, because I couldn't understand how humanity could do something like that to a child. And there's definitely elements of just like picking up on injustice. But I think the one piece of music that really unlocked it for me is the opening song to Let's Get Free by Prez. And it's this metaphor about how they catch wolves in the Arctic, and the wolf sees a puddle of water and goes and licks it, but there's a blade hidden in the water and it slowly kills itself. And it's this like really visceral metaphor. And then it's like And that's what they did to us with drugs. And like how the incarceration system in America had used this allure and like really pumped kind of cocaine and products into the marketplace, created an addiction and created people, and then created the prison industrial complex. And it was such a visceral opening to a record, because it's this like old guy talking over this like swaying sample. It's not a big kind of bombastic opening, because as soon as it switches, it goes into Bigger Than Hip Hop, which has just got the thickest bass line on it. I just remember listening to that record and being awed by it, like the ability to just have such clarity of thought. And to take, like, the first time I heard it, I mustn't have had a clue what was about to happen, because I'd heard the Bigger Than Hip Hop track, or just called Hip Hop, and was obsessed with it. And then pressing play on the record for the first time, that was I've got goosebumps thinking about it now. And I must have been all of like 16, 17. And so that was really powerful, and like sort of probably a transcendent rather than an awakening moment.
Yeah, it sounds like you probably learned a lot from that. But would you say that's, I don't know, like, was that the first time that you felt a track, I guess, give you this sense of either injustice, or did you manage to connect with people over that message that you were learning from it? I'd love to know, like, maybe practically kind of what came out of that experience for you.
Well, I was quite young and angry and like, well, not angry, but not like, I think I was reading things like No Logo around the time, and I just got the internet. So I was like looking up all these things which weren't, mostly like trying to understand the May Day protests and like figuring out like things that I felt like no one was telling me about the complexities of the world. And it was interesting because late 90s online, there was lots of like get rich quick schemes and pyramid schemes, and those, the like hyper capitalism of the world. And then at this next point, you'd be exposed to news stories which weren't being reported on TV, and that started to give me a sense of, okay, the world's a much bigger place than. I mean, I already knew and felt that the world was far bigger, because I was quite lucky that my grandparents were like quite worldly. Like, I helped my nan set up the Inner Wheel website, which is like this charity groups, and they were the first inner wheel in the world to have their own website, which my nan was quite excited by. And they did lots of, like, my nan she was a hairdresser, and then she worked on the exchange desk at Thomas Cook, which meant we got some cheap holidays as a kid. So I kind of got a sense, and she'd go off to Egypt and come back and tell me all about it and things. So, but yeah, in answer to your question, how did I feel activated by it? I guess there was a couple of friends I had conversations with that maybe I wouldn't have had normally. I think that it led me to kind of trying to like listen to a lot of their inspirations, which, having Napster at the time, was like sitting and waiting like 4 hours for a Razel track to download, or getting into Gil Scott-Heron through like chatting to someone on Napster and going, can you tell me if there's any good songs other than The Revolution Will Not Be Televised? And like chatting to random music fans online, which I guess a lot of that gave me a sense of the importance of community, and how there's like this like collective wisdom out there, and you've just got to find a way of tapping into it. So I guess there was that, which probably led to starting Drown in Sound and all the other things I was doing.
I mean, it almost leads perfectly into the next kind of, theme and area I'd like to go into, which is about us as a collective. But I just very quickly, I'm very interested in going back to something you said about when you were 3 or 4 and really just feeling, the song and the instrumentals that you were feeling very connected to. Do you happen to remember what that felt like in your body? What was it that it was doing to you?
My mum had a VW Beetle, which was very loud. And I think that it gave me a kind of calm. and something to drift off into, because I imagine like most kids fall asleep in the car, so I suspect that was part of it. But I think that it's interesting because that record was written in Berlin in this, like the shadow of the Berlin Wall. And I don't think that you get that feeling from it. So yeah, I've got ADHD, and I've discovered it's one of the reasons why my memory is not as vivid as my kind of ability to glimpse the future. And the depth of attachment some people have to memory that I don't, it's not like I can't remember it, but I would really need it to be triggered to kind of like unlock it. So yeah, so I'm sorry I can't vividly answer the question, but I just know that my mum tells me about how like I would often ask for the second side, or like would be sat in the passenger seat and rewind the tape. So, and I only found this out when I got into Sigur Rós. My mum's like, oh, this sounds like side 2 of Low that you used to like. And I was like, what? I used to like, which is one of the greatest albums of all time, but I would have been way too young to have. I just probably was switching between Prince and The Cure and like my mum's tapes in the car. Admittedly, she had lots of Simply Red in there as well. So,
well, I think everyone did. It's just interesting because there's obviously so much research about physically and physiologically, not just neurologically, but physiologically, what music does to our bodies and how it affects our nervous system and how it regulates our heartbeat. And, you know, as children, we're such sensitive, small creatures that absorb everything around us. And the fact that something managed to trigger that in you is, yeah, it's just really profound. And I mean, I don't know if you have, you know, heard much about how when we go back to hobbies when we're later in life, so if we grew up playing football, for example, and then later in life we go back to a small football league, there's something it does to our nervous system which really relaxes us. And there's similar theories with that and music as well. So music that had that effect when we were very young tends to still have that effect when we're older. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you kind of did that full loop. And
I think also the more I learn about my relationship with sound and music, not the film, and the way in which it's become like a shield, like, because you having a brain that's paying attention to like signals coming from everywhere, being able to focus in, and like I've lived in headphones. Like I would quite happily at the age of 12, 14, do nothing but listen to Green Day's Dookie or Ash's 1977, like all of those like pretty fast paced, like, and it was like, because then the rest of the world disappeared. And I guess like not being aware of the type of brain I had, not knowing like, actually I'm listening for threat, or I'm listening for a conversation that I don't need to hear, but my brain has to work out I don't need to hear it to stop processing it. And I think that if you've got a neurotypical brain, you don't have the same constant like radar trying to process everything around you to try and recognize the patterns of what's going on. And I think that the more I've begun to understand, I was only diagnosed a couple of years ago, so I'm like picking up on 40 years of not ignorance to my brain, but my inability to know that wasn't the world that everyone else experienced, and that my social anxieties and all the other things, which like loving a one-to-one conversation, knowing that I'm really sociable with people, but not with groups of people, and that I can be brilliant on stage talking at an event, be really funny and gregarious, then come off stage and just feel really awkward trying to have like initial conversations with people I've never met. And trying to do like 21-minute conversations is probably way more draining to me than like almost anything else, because I can't do small talk. And I realized that we logged on just before this call, and I think we did more than like a second of small talk. So it's like there's something comforting in discovering the sorts of people where like the amount of WhatsApp messages when someone says, how are you doing, that I leave unread because I don't know how I'm doing. I can't process that question. It's like, that's an existential question that I don't want to like And I know I just have to say fine and go through the rigmarole of like, yeah, everything's cool. And I'm like, no, it's not. There's a genocide going on. There's a climate crisis that people are ignoring. I've just watched a politician say that we should get rid of our net zero targets. Like, all of these things are not hitting me on a low level. They're hitting me on a level of dread and an intensity that people don't want to hear when they just say, how are you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I relate to practically everything that you've said, and I have very similar experiences. And what is going on collectively, quite frankly, is affecting even people who don't realize it's affecting them. I do believe it's affecting all of us on quite profound levels, especially people who are very sensitive as well to, politically and sociologically, the way our society is, moving. And this is really part of why this podcast even came about, to not ignore, not be a conversation of, yeah, I'm fine, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm fine too. It's no, we're going to take awareness of what is actually going on around us. And then despite that, still, figure out how to work within it and somehow, share the idea that there is a way to be hopeful, even if it's, not through spiritual bypassing, which I see a lot in the wellness world, not through just, let's just talk positively and everything's just going to be fine because you've got to be positive to manifest it. Like, all of these messages you hear a lot in the world of wellness, I don't think are healthy. And I think, there's an important task right now to be tapped in and also to look after ourselves and somehow work through the coming years in a way that's going to, build the foundations of the future that all of us want to live in. So I guess, what you're saying brings me on really nicely to our themes of the collective. And you've spoken so much about things like, burnout and chaos and pressures of modern life. I'd love to know, how you think music and actually anything else, help us rest, obviously personally and physically, but also collectively.
So I think this does link to what you just said about the wellness industry, the hyper-individualized way of trying to solve your own problems rather than look at the systemic issues to address. I had a conversation with someone the other day. Like, I worked on a big project a few years ago, and Universal Music give their staff like mental health time, which is great for them. But when you're a freelancer and suddenly you've got loads more work to do, and the people you need to contact are not around on release day or something, it's like, that's really stressful. And systemically giving people that you're relying on more time off, but not putting in the infrastructure, like, you'd be far better to give someone an assistant 2 days a week so they can take a day a week off than you would be just going, okay, you've suddenly got to work like a 14-hour day because you're taking Friday off. And it's like, those things are not addressing the systemic problems or the workflow problems or all those other things. So I think looking at things holistically and collectively is something that people don't do anywhere near enough. The resources that we need as a society or as a music industry or as a town or a culture just aren't there. Like, the fact that you can't just like go into a sleep pod for half an hour in most major cities, like something as basic as like a sensory kind of shut off space. Like, the only place you can do that in an airport is in the prayer room. And if you're not religious, it's a bit of a weird place to go to get away from being surrounded by hundreds of people before getting on a plane, being surrounded by hundreds of people, having maybe just been at a festival or an event with hundreds of people, and finding those spaces where we can recalibrate are rare, and like they should be the norm. Like chill out rooms in clubs make a lot of sense to me. I want a chill out room in an office. I want part of my salary to cover like the therapy that I need to deal with the people that I work with that haven't had therapy. Like, I want the systems to address their problems, not just go, oh, okay, you can have a bonus for basically burning yourself out or going above and beyond for the profit making. Because you can do things in a company or do things as a journalist or do things as a manager that don't contribute towards the profit, but actually contribute towards the abilities of people to do their jobs well, the ability of people to have a good time in the thing that they're doing. And we don't put a premium on the stuff where there's not line goes up with the profit. And I think that so much of what we need collectively, it's not always like, there's this great poster, I think she's called Tolmia, the climate activist, made. And it's a poster of like your role in I think it's the revolution. And like, yes, you can be the protester putting your body on the line, but also someone needs to make the tea. Someone needs to print the posters and design the posters. And it's like all these different roles are not always the same person. And I think that like, think about when we were in COVID, like the key workers, the people saving lives were not the people earning the money that billionaires own for putting their investments in some fund that probably is making its money from fossil fuel sales. It's like what's broken collectively can be fixed collectively, but it takes collective will. I realize I've just put the word collective in a sentence several times, but I think that the more that you become a systems thinker, and I think all of us using the internet can see it as a system, then that's quite dangerous for the systems of power, because the more we understand how things operate, the more we can, like, seeing people use terms like PDF file so that they can get around TikTok, seeing people using the cookery videos do well, or the get ready with me videos do well, and then they start talking about systemic oppression or start talking about the genocide because they know that it can cut through. And we're starting to, like, not everyone recognizes patterns, not everyone sees the zeitgeist, but I think that there's a lot of hope in the ways in which people are not awake, but alive to the idea of the system, how we start to adjust the system. And there are a lot of broken systems. Democracy is not functional, especially in the UK with first past the post. Which is why I spent a few months last year working on Stop the Tories, which was a tactical voting campaign to shift the system that we have to make it so that a Tory didn't get in by 300 votes because the votes were split between Lib Dems, Green and Labour. Like, as a nation, we voted for progressive parties for over 50 years, but the power has primarily been within the conservative coalition of people that are quite... And Reform are breaking that up a bit because the very extreme parts of the conservative coalition are moving in a different direction. And I think all of those things are collectively... The idea of compromise and pragmatism are not things that the left traditionally thinks about. But as a society, the idea that some people are making way, way more wealth and that they decide what jobs exist, they decide what the norms of society are, you don't need to be left or right to realize that that's wrong. Like, even Trump bangs on about the elites, despite the fact he is the elites and all of the people backing him are the elites. And I think that we can find ways to collectively work towards a future that we all agree that is where we want to head. I just think we don't have the leaders that really understand that vision of this is what we are building and what you need as a human being in the moment, in the short term, the like oven ready, microwave ready, like reality that the day to day that people live in, the like news cycles that the media lives in. Like, we need much, much bigger thinking, and that requires a big seismic jolt. I don't know if that even answered your question.
I mean, it more than answered my question, actually. And obviously systems change is a big thing that so many people are thinking about at the moment. And if you look at the sort of the model of systems and how they operate, and at the very top we have like the events that are occurring, you know, the recession and all of this stuff that is physically happening, and then you have various layers. You know, if it's like an iceberg, the top of the iceberg are the events, which is what we're living in, and then there's various layers, but at the very, very bottom of the iceberg is the mindsets and the belief systems that we have within a society that then affect the infrastructure and everything else. So it's going to be a long tail of work to truly change our system, in all honesty. That's why it's not going to happen overnight. But ultimately, that is what we need.
Like, I went to a Church of England school, but I'm not religious. Like, I understand the basics of what the Christian religion is about, the ideas of tolerance, the ideas of looking after one another. And Christian nationalism is not that. Like, the supremacy of some religions over others, like, just completely baffles me. And that's only the essentially the narcissistic people that have imbibed a religion to some like weird extent that they take what they want out of it. Like, to ignore the stonings and things, that's like, oh, that was just then. And it's like, okay, but so were some of these other things about who can love who, and many other things that in this religious text that you don't really even know who authored it. It's, to me, how we treat one another should be normalized by those kind of documents and religious practices. And I've not needed, like, I probably have taken a selection box of different things I've learned about different religions. Like, when I was in junior school, our head teacher became Buddhist, and it was this quite big deal that, like, he'd shifted to a religion that wasn't the national norm. I just remember him talking about the calm that he'd found. And that to me was really powerful for, like, I guess like a 7-year-old or something. Yeah, anyway, interrupted. You had a thought rolling.
No, not at all. I mean, I find the concept religion and spirituality is something I'm very interested in, because there's actually lots of research that shows that a connection with spirituality is really beneficial for our mental health. So a kind of, I guess, a knowledge that maybe there is something outside just ourselves that, you know, we're not, you know, we are in control to an extent. Actually, no religion says we don't have free agency, but there is something else that, you know, there are laws around us in a way, even like the law of nature, that we are a part of. You know, we're just not these humans that are the absolute most superior things in the universe. You know, we are part of this entangled, enmeshed system. So
yeah, talk to me about superiority when you've got a lion staring at you at the end of your bed.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, you know, at the base of every single religion, they actually all, what I've found is, preach a very similar message of take care of your neighbors, take care of your community, connect with the divine in some way or another, you know, have that time, you know, Sunday. I know it's like a Sunday for Christians. It's a Friday for Jews, a Friday for Muslims, I believe, as well. You know, and there's different practices to connect. So it's what I find interesting about Islam as well is that even the whole of the Quran is written in poetry and then sung. So that's why I'm fascinated by the way that some Muslim countries don't necessarily practice music to the extent that the Quran is a piece of music.
Music is banned in Afghanistan still at the moment, isn't it? It's like, or certain types of music.
Yeah. And I mean, I also would say that, you know, the US calls themselves a Christian country, but I don't think having guns at the ready is very neighborly. So, you know, all these people have taken things and constructed what they want out of it for probably, for political gain and for power. And it doesn't, you know, but then if you break all of it down and just look at the essence of what a lot of belief systems are saying, there's there's something very true in all of them. And and I guess that connection with something that's divine, that in a way is what music does for me. Even the song that you sent, the song that this episode is based on, it connected me to something that felt transcendent, and I could connect to my breath, and I wasn't thinking about the work I was doing. I wasn't even thinking really. I just felt sort of lifted up. And
probably the wrong thing to do before prepping before the podcast.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's why.
Sometimes that brain cleanse is so crucial, of just like being able to jump. Like, I find the same thing with that piece of music. I feel like my mind quietens. And there were very few pieces of music that do that just completely leave you drifting into it. I wanted to go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, actually, because like the way that wellness is hyper individualized, I struggled quite a bit with like meditation practices and this works for loads. Like, I remember listening to David Lynch talking about transcendental meditation and just being like, that's what I need. That sounds amazing. And I couldn't even get my head around what it really was. So I went to like a 2-day course, which seems weird to go do a course to basically just quiet your mind. But that is how broken our society is, that we don't know how to sit quietly. Because, like, to be honest, that was pretty much what it was. It was about having a like hum of a rhythm in your brain, like a mantra that they gave you, which I think becomes like tongues, like whatever that is, you just morph it into this little ball. But it didn't really click for me. Like, I had like one moment of like my brain releasing, apparently. Like, I had this like kettle sound in my head, where it just felt like some tension, probably from some very intense noise where I've been clenching in my brain for years. But what I found was that sound-related meditation really worked for me. I've got this app called Luminate, which uses light therapy. So you close your eyes and the flash of your phone strobes, and it creates these patterns and colors because of the speed of the light, like tiny, tiny shifts. But it has Rosamund Pike doing some of the voice guidance, but actually it's just this beautiful piece of ambient music they've commissioned. And I found, it's sound, because I need the other vector of my brain's just not going to wander off on its own tangential paths. Like, I found Headspace actually quite stressful, especially on public transport, because it goes silent for these long periods of time. And all that meant was I was listening into people's, even though I had noise cancelling headphones on, listening into conversations or hearing what train station we were stopping at next, and was not able to kind of like, guess, like shut down a computer or put it in sleep mode. So I think that I found a lot of like, this is just how you do, like, it's almost like wellness is like this thing where you have to go like all in on it, like taking a day off to go to a spa. And actually, I think that I've got a meditation app in my virtual reality headset, and it's like a 10-minute thing where sometimes, like, one of the exercises, you just follow a butterfly and you're sitting on this little boat and you end up going down this tunnel. And it's like, that left me not thinking of anything else but that butterfly for 10 minutes. And obviously you can go for a walk in the woods and sort of do similar. And I think that, there's something there that I get a lot. And I think, like, in church and things, people get something out of being in singing and collectively kind of being part of this hive mind of voices. And I think I can completely understand why that does similar for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting because therapy itself is actually only a proven concept in the West. So in the West, we are an individualist culture. That's just how, and that's why, it's a highly capitalist culture, and this is the way we work, and it's the way we've worked for quite a while. So I guess a lot of these solutions and therapy does work. Therapy is amazing for people. Like, myself and so many benefit out of it hugely. But I think what's interesting is, you look at a lot of cultures that aren't individualist, things like therapy, or let alone things like the meditation apps, they will not work. It's just not how they process emotion. It's not how they feel connected and as one.
I mean, the people that have rolled their eyes when I say use VR, they're like, that's the opposite. You should be sitting in a forest. I'm like, yeah, but I am in a forest. It's just one I can put on in my room when I want to take a quick break. And I know I'm taking a screen break to another screen, but like, if I didn't, I'm not going to carve out 20 minutes to go to the forest. Like, I do live in the countryside, so I'm quite lucky. And like, yeah, it's like meeting you where you are, I think, is sometimes more important than trying to like force a situation.
So that's really interesting. What is this VR experience that you do?
There's a few different ones. I have to remember the names, and you can put them in the show notes. I can't remember the name of it. I've got complete mind blank. There's a few different ones, and they're slowly getting better because I think people are investing a bit more in the tech. And I think since Apple Vision Pro came along, I think people are trying to work out how to make it actual real spaces rather than digital worlds.
And is there in these VR worlds, are you interacting with other people, or are you on your own? Interesting.
Some of them you can join a group session, so like going like to almost like a Peloton session or something. But I've never done those.
I guess part of it will
just
be
randomly do it.
I guess it's multisensory as well. Your vision, your senses. It's far more than just.
The sound's really good because it's like the Dolby Atmos-y type, like surround sound. So. And they do like box breathing, and it's just literally a box on screen, or like following that. So it's like visually you can follow it rather than needing someone to tell you what to do. They give you the initial instructions, and you can just follow that. So
interesting, because I think something that really works for me, and I've realized, and I can still do a lot of the individualist stuff, which of course will help me with certain things. But the things that tend to help me the most are being in community, and either sitting in like circle with people that I trust and that I'm connected with, or going to live music events, or just having these really communal and collective experiences with other people. Like, I'd love to know if you know anything like that in your world, in the music industry, that you've seen works.
So a collective music experience that's not just a show.
Yeah, so some kind of collective experience that you feel is healing, that, I guess it could just be a show.
No, it's interesting because I think maybe the first few shows I went to might have felt like that, but then you get like used to being in a room full of people. Some of the shows I've been to where the light installations and things are really moving, or the placement of the stage. Like, I remember the first time I saw this band called Lightning Bolt, who just set up randomly in the room. And you turn around and there's suddenly a drum kit and someone wearing a mask screaming in a great way. I think for me, there's something about the kind of organizing elements of people trying to come together to create some change, where you kind of run through the solutions in the process. Like, I don't know, I think, again, going back to like adjusting the system, of hearing from people that like, well, this is the thing that I understand about this bit, and this is the thing that I understand about this bit. And I think that sense of community of like, we can do this thing and it could be really amazing, is pretty powerful. But also seeing things like Broken Social Scene perform, where you've got a bunch of solo artists and people from like Do Make Say Think, which were like a jazzy kind of instrumental band, and Feist wanders on stage and starts singing. And I think there's something about seeing that hive mind come to life that's really powerful. I just looked up the name of the VR app, by the way. It's called Trip with 2 Ps.
Okay, great.
You can see some of it online. There's a couple of other ones that I've downloaded as well, but I think it's Trip's the one with the butterfly that you can follow, because it's just like, it's really basic, but you go into like, I don't know if you ever saw those like rave tunnels as a kid, Like it's kind of like one of the tunnels is a bit of that kind of vibe, but you're on this like little It's a Small World boat following the butterfly. I guess the community element of a lot of shows, like when you're working on a big event, like seeing like, I guess like the ants put the kind of stage together and like build the whole process. Like there's something quite nice about being part of that, like putting something on and making something possible. But I think that's also like the Together for Palestine show, for instance, recently, that just seemed really stressful because it was trying to fit way more things onto a stage, way more people on like to do performance than is normal. Like if it had been 3 artists with 1 backing band, it would have probably not looked from the outside as quite a stressful thing to put together and to, because watching the show, all I kept seeing was like Tex wheel stuff on and wheel stuff off for like one song. And I was like, that's a lot of work and energy. And like, you can just picture the people behind the stage putting the drum kit up. And then like, by the time that artist is going on, they're putting another drum kit up. And then the next stage, they're putting a synth rack up. And
I feel like because that's so much your bag, you probably noticed all of that, and maybe they left it out of the YouTube, live. But I don't think
I would have thought like the morning after people are going to feel like they've really accomplished something. So it's probably like, and they raised 2.2 million, so that also is probably amazing. Good thing for a big show at Wembley. So yeah. For my moment of calm, I thought I'd read something from 1841, written by a Scottish journalist and crowd psychologist called Charles Mackay. It's from the book Extraordinary Pop Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. This is just a little taste of the prologue of the book, and I thought it was fitting to overlap with some of the topics we discussed on this episode. In reading the history of nations, we find that, like individuals, they have their whims and their peculiarities, their seasons of excitement and recklessness when they care not what they do. We find that whole communities suddenly fix their minds upon one subject and go mad in its pursuit, that millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught by some new folly more captivating than the first. We see one nation suddenly seize from its highest to its lowest members with a fierce desire of military glory, another is suddenly becoming crazed upon a religious scruple, and neither of them recovering its senses until it has shed rivers of blood and sowed a harvest of groans and tears to be reaped by its posterity. At one early age in the annals of Europe, its population lost their wits about the sepulture of Jesus and crowded in frenzied multitude to the Holy Land. Another went mad for the fear of the devil and offered up hundreds and thousands of victims to the delusion of witchcraft. At another time, the many became crazed on the subject of the philosopher's stone and committed follies till the then unheard of pursuit. Some delusions, though notorious to all the world, have subsisted for ages, flourishing as widely among civilized and polished nations as among the early barbarians with whom they originated, that of dueling, for instance, and the belief of omens and divination of the future, which seem to defy the progress of knowledge to eradicate them entirely from the popular mind. Money, again, has often been a cause of the delusion of multitudes. Sober nations, all at once, become desperate gamblers, risk almost their existence upon the turn of a piece of paper. To trace the history of the most prominent of these delusions is the object of the present pages. Men, it has been said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one.
There's only a couple of questions left, and I realise we've already hit an hour. I can't believe it's gone by so quickly. So, you've witnessed so much transformation in the music industry, but also in like culture more broadly, in technology, how that's changed over the past 25, 30 years. So I'd love to know, out of what you've seen, what is it that is giving you hope right now?
Hope feels quite foreign to me a lot of the time. Like, I know that it's really interesting. People have been saying the Drown in Sound podcast is quite hopeful. And it's not a feeling that necessarily when I've booked someone to talk about harassment in the music industry, like hope wasn't the first reason for doing it, but I'm trying to meet people that are pushing change, or when we've looked at like boycotting Spotify, like actually it's giving people hope because they're like, oh, collectively we do have the power to step away from these big systems. And I think that in terms of technology that's giving me hope, it's not technology that exists, it's the possibility of technology that could exist. I think all of the ideals of the early internet of connecting people has been something that, like, I was lucky to be online in like 96, 97, like being on message boards and people just talking about music. Like the main reason the Drowned in Sound forums exist is because I didn't like having to go to like the Radiohead forum or the Weezer forum to talk about a new record that was out this week, because you're sort of within the doctrine of like that band and their fan base who mostly just want to talk about Radiohead or Muse or whoever it was. And I wanted to build a community with no doctrine, no like overhanging, we're a community that likes this band, which is great because one of the first big conversations about dubstep online happened on our forums, alongside probably people discussing some like really nerdy indie band, and then someone discussing the best songs to test your headphones with. And that wouldn't happen necessarily on a Muse message board where people were just into guitar music, and it would have happened, but maybe not right at the embryonic stage of dubstep. We had this thread called Top 5 Dubstep Songs, which was like the top result if you Googled dubstep for a few years. And it had like hundreds of thousands of views a year, just by creating this space where people were like updating their list of their top fives as the genre evolved. I'm gutted that doesn't exist anymore. We nuked the archive, and those are the kind of bits of like music and cultural history that we were responsible for creating creating the space for, not for creating. And I understand our community didn't want their entire conversation history from when they first started using the internet back in the early 2000s to be available forevermore, even if they were mostly pseudonymous posts. I guess the things that give me hope, though, in amongst all of that is that you see things like, we see artists like Janelle Monáe become megastars. And I don't know whether in the early 2000s or late 90s, whether a Black queer woman with songs that are rich with both powerful, inspiring messages and filth would necessarily have risen like she has. I think that there's also just like a better sense of people being able to, when they do connect and like create amplification networks and collective projects, there are ways of those reaching an audience and growing. I think that the MySpace era was maybe a bit more hopeful because you could start a DIY club night and people would come, like a few hundred people would find out about this thing you were doing. Now there's a bit too much noise for those things to cut through, and then it doesn't super serve the algorithm, and what Jamila Jamil calls doesn't satisfy algo daddy, and which she sometimes tends to do the a low cut top going, this one's for algo daddy to make sure I cut through. Yeah. And I think that we have systems that are not designed to do like the TikTok shop and the ways in which people are trying to build businesses and sell products. None of that stuff is what the platforms were really for, but it's what they've become their purpose. And I'm hopeful that people are building the systems that we need in ways that can calibrate to who we are as people. My hope would be that we have a platform where you can only post 3 times a week, so there's less noise, or a platform where you can opt to get notifications from a few organizations and people, and you can only pick like a top 8 like you had on MySpace. And once those projects are over, you can pick other things to be kept up to date on, rather than subscribing to 60 Substacks in the hope that you keep up to date with a project that you thought was really inspiring, but now is just an email you don't have time to read because you've had 30 other emails that week about different newsletters that all go into a folder marked newsletters.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's an entire newspaper's worth of stuff unread in my inbox. So I think that people are having to rethink how we connect to each other as human beings and how we connect as a collective. And I'm hopeful because I'm hearing people in small rooms and bigger rooms talking about, like Meredith from Signal, one of the most inspiring, hopeful people to listen to. She's built a piece of technology that even people in the White House are using. And she's got a really great thought on like where the internet is and where it's going. I think primarily it's seeing like lots of women taking over at these big companies. Like, I know that's not necessarily always a sign that things are changing for the better, but we can't just have endless Elon Musks and people subservient to them running corporations for profit. And I hope that the internet will re-find why it started. I hope that voices like Tim Berners-Lee, who does constantly push to return to the fundamentals of why this technology existed and who it exists for, and it's not for the 1%. And I think if it's the 90%, not the 99%, I think there's 9% of people lost in their kind of, this is how things always will be. And a lot of those are generational wealth, media pundits who set the norms of society. And I feel like I'm just rambling now, and I could probably go on for about another hour.
No, because everything, it's not ramble, but everything you're saying is so true and so important. And I've got one more question for you.
Yep. And
the question is based on, I guess it's the concept that, I think in our society a lot, presence is incredibly important. And we think about, but then almost we sometimes hyper individualize that presence, like, okay, now is the only time that matters. So I'm not going to think about the past or my ancestors. I'm not going to think about the future and our descendants. So our collective descendants in 100 years' time, what is one message that you would like them to take, either from this podcast, a way to build hope and resilience, a type of sound you'd love them to hear? It could be anything that you would love to say to these people. And hopefully this podcast will go into a little time capsule and they might actually listen.
I was very fortunate to work with Max Richter for a year and Yulia Ma. And I got to work on the Voices project, which is a soundtrack to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that document, I think, has just turned 100 years old. And it feels like a document that sits at the bottom of people's paper trays, and they've not. I knew that we have human rights, but I'd never heard someone just read them. And it's Kiki Lane, who was in If Beale Street Can Talk, doing the reading. And I think it's over 100 voices of voice notes from around the world that they got a community of fans to record, and tried to find people in as many different languages as possible to read the declaration and to use as samples on the record. And I think that being reminded that as human beings, we have rights, and that we have systems set up to protect us from corporate power, from corrupt politicians, from fascism, from authoritarianism, from I guess I'm thinking dystopian, if in 100 years' time, then people are living under, like, I guess like that scene in WALL-E where they're like floating around on a spaceship and like just locked into the system. And the idea that like in the UK, we're having all these conversations about leaving the European Court of Human Rights, and the Tory party, the most conservative party in the country, want us to have less rights. I mean, a lot of our stuff with Brexit was about having fewer workers' rights and how much they push against the unions, and because unions is collective power. And the more individualized we become, and the more your ambitions can outscale everyone else's, the hope that that gives some people of they'll be all right and they can have generational wealth too. It's partly worse than like the myth of meritocracy that you will rise through if you're good at things. I think that coming back to human beings have human rights, regardless of where in the world you're born, regardless of what you've got in your pocket, regardless of whether you live in a country that's got an awful regime or whether you like, and I think there's so many fundamentals that we can lose sight of. And I think as both an anchor and a compass, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is crucial to probably more than any religious text, any like terms and conditions, like any, like if Apple can't even enforce their own terms and conditions on the App Store of what is acceptable, like, and they're meant to be a company that's about civil society and ensuring, but Tommy Robinson and all the stuff that Elon Musk's done with Twitter over the last few years is acceptable within the confines of the App Store. If InfoWars is acceptable in the podcast store, like we can't rely on even the corporations that say that they're there for all of us. I think that we need those fundamentals. We need them. Like, imagine if in school, rather than people pledging to the flag or whatever they do in America or singing to Jesus, that we read our Universal Declaration of Human Rights out even once a year. I think it would just be so moving. So yeah, I was so inspired to work with Max and Yulia on this project, and I loved that I could live in a world where I was turning up to work and having meetings with Human Rights Watch, and then speaking to record companies and speaking to films that they were working on, all these different things. And that to me was someone really understanding the power of a piece of music, which people should still be listening to in 100 years. And I think that so much of the way the world's calibrated right now is like, how do we have a hit in 6 months? And I think that the fundamentals are there. And I think that's the biggest challenge of the information age, which became the communication age, which some people think has now become a time of knowledge or artificial intelligence. Like, I don't feel like it's become we've not become more intelligent by having more deep fakes. We've not become wiser by having the world's knowledge at our fingertips. We've just become unable to work out what to filter. And if misinformation and disinformation can run rife at a time when you can fact check in your pocket, you can literally use AI to fact check something before amplifying it, then the systems are broken and failing us. And I think in 100 years' time, we'll either have had a reckoning or people will need it more than ever.
Wow, that's completely blown me away. And I could not agree more with everything you said. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So this episode is a little bit different to the other episodes. As you probably know, Sean is the producer of this show, and the episode was actually done as a bit of a pilot or a tester. And we put it into the series because so much of what he said is incredible, and he is an amazing person for you to get to know, especially if you're not already on the Drowned in Sound kind of community network. So there are just a couple of things that I'd love to pull out of Sean's interview that I guess really resonated with me. The first thing is relating to people on a deeper level. So not just, asking, how are you? Yes, I'm fine. How are you? Trying to relate in a way that can, share some of the collective issues that we're all going through. And I guess what came up for me is the need for us to relate in a deeper way. How are you, as he said, has become an existential question. The deeper we can relate with each other, the more honest we can end up being about the current state of affairs in our society, and therefore probably the quicker we can get to possible solutions. Solutions usually start as conversations between friends, between colleagues, and I really feel the depth of conversation that I can have with Sean. I think he mentioned as well that, he's not much for small talk. We live in a society where now is the time to not get stuck in small talk and to allow what we really feel to come to the surface within our conversations, which then become our actions and then become more serious grounding things like policies and procedures, etc. He also mentioned one thing which I found quite funny, but actually very sadly true, that he said that he needs therapy to deal with some of the people who haven't had therapy. And I think that, not everyone can access therapy, of course, but sometimes just a level of self-awareness, that there becomes a separation when, you are in a room with people. And if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you're somebody who does feel things deeply, who cares about the world, cares about change, what your role can be in the conduit of change that we're all trying to sort of fit into. And I feel, and I understand from first-hand experience, that it can be quite isolating to be around or with people that might not yet be at your level of consciousness or awareness or willingness to take action about the things that are important for justice, for social change. And even though it's, of course, not everyone is going to, and not therapy doesn't necessarily solve the problem for everybody, but I just wanted to maybe acknowledge that point for anybody that's listening that, feels like they are a little bit different by caring about the world and, about making a difference. He also spoke about third spaces, not directly in that those words, but he mentioned at one point that, if you're not necessarily religious, then you wouldn't go to the prayer room at a airport to have a moment of solitude. We don't have sleep pods to get some rest in the city. It's all about go, 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 go. And even though those aren't third spaces, those are very personal spaces for your own kinds of reflection, contemplation, meditation, etc. It really made me think about the idea of third spaces. So third spaces are things like community centres, yes, churches, mosques, synagogues, sometimes live music venues. Sometimes it could be workspaces, but usually not. It's separate to work, separate to home life, somewhere where you can come together to organise. And third spaces are becoming less and less in our society. Music venues are shutting down. Community centres are losing funding. People aren't as religious. People aren't necessarily going to church on a Sunday, which would usually be a place where you would come together as community. And I mention this because I do believe that our lack of third spaces is partially contributing to a lot of people's sense of overwhelm, disconnect from community. And I don't have a solution for that, but I just wanted to mention it because I'd love to see a return of third spaces that feel relevant to people's culture and where we are at the present. He also spoke, like with a lot of our guests, about the roles in a revolution, that not every person will have the same role. And sometimes, there's one person banging on the doors of government and there's somebody else that's making the tea, or there's somebody else that's consoling the people that have just come out of court. And I'm mentioning this again because I do think it's one of the most important parts of social change is really understanding what our individual role is in social change, knowing where our skills lie, what our zone of genius is, so to say, and not pressuring ourselves to be everything to everyone. And I think that understanding different roles, you can search it up, is a really powerful thing to understand when it comes to knowing about social change mechanisms. And the last couple of bits I wanted to mention is he was very hopeful about the possibility of technology that could exist, that might not exist now. And that is why most people have created a lot of the technology we have, is to make the world a better place, is to solve some big social problems, but some of our biggest strengths end up being our biggest weaknesses. It's a double-edged sword sometimes. So I really would love to, myself included, to try and look at a lot of the technology we have and what the benefits could be, and just think about, what does the future look like in terms of the possibilities that still exist? I mean, there are so many stones yet uncovered. And lastly, culture happens in the spaces where things can be discussed. He spoke about the very early days of Drowned in Sound and this kind of cultural melting pot where people first started discussing music genres that were new on the scene, and there's so much dialogue that people were connecting over in this space. And, at the helm of every music genre is, at the helm of every subculture, are music genres. And just circling it all back to music again, being able to be in a space of our favorite music, discussing our favorite music with people who feel the same. And the reason why someone might love a particular artist or love a particular music genre is probably because they're quite similar to me. And that's what I love about working within music, that it brings together these like-minded people that care about similar issues, feel a similar way. And maybe a great next step is going and finding the people that love the music that I love and just discussing it. The way we used to dissect stories at school or, dissect poetry, maybe that's something that could be really beneficial, both as a form of connection and a form of personal meditation and inquiry. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Sounds Like Change with the amazing Sean Adams, and I look forward to seeing you next time.